Let's be brutally honest right now. That's a big question.
I'm looking for someone who doesn't want to go to base camp, but they want to go to the very top.
Whether it's here, India, New York.
Civilization was born at happy hour.
That's what wins. That's what stands out. That's what people are interested in. That's what I want to know. The Hospopreneurs Podcast with James Henderson. Hello and welcome to episode 127 of the Hospopreneurs Podcast. SPC is Australia's leading producer of premium packaged fruit. It's a company with over 100 years of history and one that has subsidiaries that many of us have fond memories of. You might recognise SPC from its baked beans, tin spaghetti or fruit cups, but they do so much more, and Robert Giles, a recognised senior leader of large-scale FMCG and multi-channel businesses, leads them as their CEO. With 30 years of experience across brands like Simplot, Nestle and Coca-Cola Amatil, Rob believes that despite Australia's small market, if executed correctly, SPC will put Australian food manufacturing on the map. The episode today is sponsored by our friends at Access Collins. I first used their platform with Made in the Shade Group down in Melbourne to seat some of the biggest names in the industry, and it made doing so super easy. They offer a comprehensive table management and end-to-end inquiry management system, so if that's something you're looking for, check them out at theaccessgroup.com.au. Back to the show. Hello and welcome to the show, Rob.
Thank you. Nice to be here, James.
Rob, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on. I know that there's been a lot of change occurring with SPC over the last 18 months. And then prior to that, there must have been a lot going on. And you've seen that change. You've been with the company for a long time now. So I normally ask about why or a crazy hospitality story first, but I actually want to open up this episode about what you actually do with SPC.
Yeah, so SPC has gone through a really exciting journey over the last 3 years that I've been here. We were previously, when I joined, owned by Coca-Cola. I joined because I could see an exit coming out for the business. It was a poor fit with the Coca-Cola business, and I wanted to take the opportunity of see where that led to. A PE company purchased this business with some really passionate owners now that want to turn this business from what it is to over $1 billion food company, and we've been working really hard for the last 18 months and trying to bring that to fruition.
Fantastic. And I'm really interested in opening that up a lot more over the interview together. But in true Hospopreneurs fashion, I'd like to ask you a crazy hospitality story or exceptional hospitality experience. Rob, have you got something to open up the episode with?
This one goes back probably 10 years ago now. And I think it's a great example of people being a little bit aware of the cultures they're working with and going that extra mile. With a big group of Australians touring in Peru when we were lucky enough to go to Machu Picchu on the Hiram train out of Cusco. And what sort of stood out, and it was absolutely a fantastic day. There's probably 100 Australians on that took out the whole train. And coming back at night time, the hospitality staff got really concerned because one thing Australians are known for is drinking lots of beer, probably more so than spirits or other fluids. And they ran out of beer. And I think the Peruvians were getting a little bit worried about a restless train of Australians with no beer. And while I think we tried our best to alleviate their fears, halfway along in the trip, they stopped in this small village. It was hard to see the village because they had no electricity. And the train stopped. You could see a group of them jump off the train with little lanterns. And wherever in this village, they knew there was cartons of beer. And they brought it all back, kept the train happy and kept going. So I thought it was a really good example of how the hospitality staff go into that bit extra effort, whether it was by concern or just true hospitality fashion to keep the beer flowing.
Fantastic. And was that a business trip? Was that just a personal one? Or
I was lucky to be on the end of a business trip with one of our major distributors.
Oh, excellent. And so they obviously understood that the Australians needed their beers. Thank you for sharing that story as well there, Rob. From the crazy hospitality story, I normally like to ask why you do what you do. This is a really lateral question. I'm interested fundamentally what it is that really drives you, what gets you up in the morning, what inspires you. So why do you ultimately do what it is that you do?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I had to sit and reflect on it for a while. I think I've always been in the food space. I grew up there with my family. I'm very competitive by nature, so I think that's what keeps me here and keeps me going. But my father was a Nestle food service sales representative. Pretty much got very much a sales commercial background, and my first role was out of working for junior at Coles, was going into Nestle as well in the Carnation division, as it was back then in the late 80s. And joining them as a sales representative. So I think growing up around my father was an influence, seeing food manufacturing, food and food service. I think that led me into that area. What's probably kept me there over this journey, and I spent 7 or so years with Nestle, but it's been a good part of my career with Simplot, which is a major American-owned family food company, steeped in agriculture. And building that business from its inception in Australia in 95 through its first 20 years has really built that passion for being one of the last Australian manufacturers that is still supporting Australian agriculture. Now, while it's not Australian owned, it kept the agricultural places in situ where companies like the Heinz and the rest were offshoring their businesses. Simplot stayed true to agriculture, had a really nice long-term view on agriculture. They had an ethos that they knew that it would make sense to produce food in Australia in the long term, even though the processing of food was going through some pretty tough times with the droughts. And I think helping them and keeping their factories open, the agricultural side is really what's kept me here. Has really led me into SPC because it's got a similar story. What's better now that it's 100% Australian owned as well. And it's had a well-publicised tough time over the years, probably in the wrong ownership, and being able to win in that environment on behalf of agriculture and Australian food manufacturing is definitely what gets me up in the morning.
With businesses that are vertically integrated, like the ones you described, so Simplot sounds like it is vertically integrated, but they've moved over to Australia. What has allowed a business like that to be successful? Is it the fact that it occupies different spaces along the supply chain, or do you think that other businesses that are operating outside that space can be just as successful?
I think it's because agriculture is in their nature. Some companies are driven on the year-by-year financial return, and if they're publicly owned, the share market dictates that they shall grow. And I think being a family company that's used to agricultural cycles allowed companies like Simplot to have a longer-term view. And the consumers in Australia also were still crying out for companies to provide Australian produce. I'm sure we'll talk about the changes in COVID, but we've really seen people returning to Australian produce, and I think it's that long-term view of a company like Simplot or the view that we have here at SPC that puts us in a great position at the moment.
And SPCs are over 100 years old now, just over 103 this year, I think. So there's so many changes that would have occurred over the last 100 years, and now you're able to shape part of that change. I'm interested now you mentioned there that SPC was sold by Coca-Cola recently and going through that change. How have things actually changed with the business, and what are you looking to do with the company moving forward?
Yeah, so it's changed quite dramatically. Go back to the SPC wasn't a good fit for Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola are very successful in the beverages world, really big brand. And I can only guess at why they bought SPC back in 2005, but it wasn't a good fit. So therefore, we were pretty much an orphan within their network. So therefore, I think that's what's one of the big catalysts for change for us is the fact that we can write our own destiny. We're privately owned, and we've set about by getting the business reinvigorated and energized behind a new strategy. So I think that's the great thing about that separation. In terms of what we're trying to do, we describe ourselves as wanting to be our chairman is famous for saying that we want to be the Nestle of Australia, and what we mean by that is a small country, Switzerland, has got a global footprint with its business, and we want to be the same here. So we want to absolutely have really strong roots in Australia, and our basis is for Australia, but we've definitely got our eyes on international markets and expanding internationally, and that's not only taking Australian product to the world, and we've got some specific regions we're trying to chase, but also to buy new businesses overseas that are in the food agricultural space that we're in, and we've definitely had already pre-COVID made some steps towards doing that. So we wanted to stay in agriculture. We're not too vertically integrated. We start at the farm gate, and then we stop towards the consumer or retail or end user in our food service business. And we're really chasing different channels to work within. So while people know us for our brands in the retail grocery space in fruit and baked beans and tomatoes, we're also got a large food service business. Up to 40% of our business is in ingredients and food service. We see that growing as a proportion of our business in the future. We're heavily focused on health and aged care. And one of our recent acquisitions was, the cuisine frozen meals business, really demonstrated that target of being a provider of food into those particular channels. So we want to grow those channels. We're not going to be a $1 billion company by continuing to sell cans of fruit. Now, cans of fruit will always be an important part of our mix, but we're working with trying to set an entrepreneurial mindset in our skill sets and our team to see what else can we do with fruit. So fruit will be an important base, but is it in snacking? Is it in the packaging types? Is it in the channels that we go? How do we build off our base of canned processed foods into other more, the power of the plant and the rise, I call it the rise of the vegans. It's here and it's alive and it's growing. So how do we position ourselves for success in that environment?
You mentioned there that you're developing an entrepreneurial mindset within the team. How are you doing that? Are there certain texts or people or businesses that you're drawing inspiration on to develop those systems within your own teams?
Yeah, so I think a lot of it firstly is around the skill sets and the permission to think differently. We're working on some programs that will see us announcing later this year a real open sourcing sort of strategy around innovation. Because we're in that acquisitive mode, we can buy companies that have already done a lot of the legwork, maybe just past the startup and in the scale up sort of space. Part of it also is about the skill sets, bringing in a chief commercial officer, a head of marketing, a head of innovation that have got runs on the board. We're choosing our partners really carefully. We've got a collaboration with Cyro in Werribee, and we're working through a model where we look to commercialise some of the ideas in the fruit space that they have there, where we've created a joint venture with a German company called Dola, which is a global food ingredients company that are renowned for their R&D, and we want to tap into their global experience. So we've very much got a multifaceted sort of approach to building that skill set within the business. And getting those skill sets in place, or those people that are strong in this area, will then help us, we're only just over a year old, develop, the model and the framework that we go. But we're being normal private equity, we've got a real pace. So we don't stop and consider and strategize for a long time. We get on and do, and it's one of those values. One of our values is rolling up our sleeves, and that's what we're doing at the moment.
I'd like to step back just a little bit more generally. What are the sort of brands that SPC owns and covers that people might know that they might see in the shops, or maybe they see them around or advertised? What are the consumer-facing brands that people may not be aware that you actually have under SPC?
Yeah, SPC is a real house of brands, and it's growing in that space at the moment. So our traditional SPC fruit and baked beans is a brand that most people would know, but also our Golden Valley brand in fruit. We own the Ardmona brand in Australian tomatoes, which is the only branded Australian tomato out there, only Australian brand of fruit. SPC baked beans and spaghetti. We also have more recently purchased the Pom Life pomegranate business, selling fresh arils, that's the seeds within a pomegranate, to the supermarket business. And more recently, we bought the cuisine business, which is a frozen meals business. It's got brands of the Good Meal Company and the Gluten-Free Meal Company, which really sell into the health and aged care sector. We also have our Pro Vital brand, which sells into the health and aged care sector. And as of this week, we've finalised the completion of a sale of a purchase of a business called Helping Humans, which is a kombucha beverage business based out of here in Victoria. So a lot of consumer brands that fit under all that change.
I'd like to look forward a little further into what is happening around any innovation that you're seeing. I know that you cover a lot of different spaces. I'd like to ask more generally, maybe in the packaging space, or I know that you do a lot of canning as well. What's actually been happening on an innovation front?
It's a really good question because it's something that's concerning our consumers at the moment, and sustainability is a key driver, and our owners are really concerned about it as well. So there's a really big pushback to steel cans. Pre-COVID, we were looking for what will be the next steel can, and we still will look for it, but demand of shelf-stable products has gone up dramatically. Plastics and pouches are a real concern for us as we look for more sustainable and working with government on how do we get better recyclability of those particular products. And I suppose the big change in the future will be what will be the new steel can, and that is an innovation space that we'll definitely be involved in, but I don't have the answer at this stage. And that might be shorter shelf life. So we're happy to work in environments that give a fresher, better experience to consumers under a shorter shelf life perhaps, rather than the experience we've had in the past of a steel can which keeps things for 2 years plus.
Does that mean that you see larger trends occurring in the retail space, in supermarkets or fruit markets? Or do you see consumers changing the way that they purchase these sorts of goods?
I think there's absolutely a call out for it. And like I said, we were experiencing that in steel cans, but we've actually, and globally, the demand for products in steel cans gone up tremendously. But I think we know, and we've seen examples of single-use plastic items being phased out or taxed in some particular way. And we've got to look at those where the consumer's asking for more and our responsibility there. So that's where our focus will be. And there's all sorts of great effort being put in that place globally, whether it's using corn or vegetable starches as a packaging substrate. There's obviously a lot more people looking for authenticity and the freshest possible delivery of their produce. So it's, with a large manufacturing history and footprint, we are on the processing side, not so much on the fresh. We've got to try and find out what is that new format that's because the retailers are absolutely asking for it, and we're working with them to how do we solve it.
Are they giving you any clue as to what those customers are wanting, and what your consumer actually wants, how their purchasing behaviour is changing, or are you completing marketing studies and tests on the consumer and what's actually going on there?
I think it's a bit of both. The retailers are absolutely very open what their consumers are asking for. So we work with their departments, their insights, and their data. They've got a magnificent set of data in terms of what people are calling for. But also we'll be doing a lot of research ourselves because there's obviously good commercial advantage in being able to solve that as well for ourselves within our manufacturing capability, which may obviously cause a change in our type of capability as well.
To stick with a question on innovation, and I know that fruit is a large component of your business you mentioned there earlier, what does innovation in fruit and that world look like for your business? And what have you seen more broadly?
Yeah, a couple of things. So one of the things that we're really focusing on in our fruit world is the different, I don't like the term, but it's the waste streams that are currently coming out of our business. We think of juicing our fruit. There's a lot of pomace that comes out, or we take a lot of apricots and peaches. There's a big part of the fruit is the kernel that sits inside. And so it's what do we do with those particular waste streams? And there are some real opportunity because out of all that fruit pomace or fruit waste that you get in, there's still a lot of sugars left over. So it's what do we do with those sugars? Where can we add value? Can we convert them into, other products, whether it's a fruit flour or a snacking product? And that's, the types of work we'll be doing with Cyro to see what are the possibilities to make sure that we really measure fruit coming into the front of our factory in terms of bricks, which is for people out there that are not aware is the sugar content. And therefore it's what do we process that bricks into? And we're looking for, obviously the first part is our processed direct fruit. We also do juices and purees and pastes, but the leftover waste streams, there's some real value there. You think of, the rise of vegetarianism or, the fact that people just want to reduce for health and well-being reasons the amount of red meat that they're consuming. And what do we substitute that with? And we think there's some real value to be made out of what as a whole food mass we bring into the factory. And that's what we're trying to, the innovation part comes alive in terms of what do we create that's new, that's valued by the consumer.
I have one last question on innovation for you as well, Rob. So I'd actually like to ask, and this is one I ask many guests, is what are you learning about or exploring at the moment? So where are you pushing things forward or innovating? This can be personal, can be professional. If you've got two answers for each of those, I'd love to hear them both.
for us, solving that waste issue and how do we add value to it and what markets. So part of it is understanding what markets that need it. So I think that whether we can turn those fruit fibres into a flour that becomes a filler for bread or creates fibre, rich fibre content, vegetable patties, there's a lot of opportunity in that space. So I think that's where we're focusing as a business a lot on. For innovation for myself, more personally, is how do we drive this, the change of this business at such a fast rate when, we've acquired, like I said, 3 businesses in 12 months. I've probably got 3 acquisitions on the go at the moment, and being able to change the business model that was, big food processor under Coca-Cola into that more entrepreneurial mindset of, a business in change that's adapting and growing really fast. So that organisational lead and design is where I'm trying to innovate.
For businesses that might be going in the opposite direction, maybe they're smaller and more entrepreneurial, and they don't have to be less entrepreneurial if they're owned by a larger company. There just tends to be more bureaucracy with the changes that they want to make. I'd like to ask you a little bit on your insights, being able to see that difference and moving from that large company to being on the other side of that now. What are the sort of things that business owners should look out for, and maybe owners of those companies, when they move in the opposite direction, things that they should be conscious of if they're looking to be acquired by a larger company?
I think it's really about understanding the strategy piece first. So understanding where they want to get to and remaining consistent to that. You mentioned the bureaucracy, but I think it's just our new rebranding is around the idea of better food for the future. And we've got all these platforms around being better. And so it's really giving that true north to people that they keep focusing on. The benefit of being more agile is being clear on your strategy and having that ability to act. And I think that's where business can get caught up. They spend a lot of time putting in processes and meetings, and rather than trialing and maybe failing, but learning and moving quickly. So I would, under the entrepreneurial mindset, I would absolutely, acknowledge that there will be failures, but it's what you take out of them and how you position yourself forward.
When you're going through that process of acquiring another company as well, what sort of things are you looking for in those businesses, in those founders themselves? We've talked about this on the show a lot previously, but I'm interested to know if your answer, if there's anything different in there, in case that there's something else that listeners can gain from your insights, or if there's anything idiosyncratic to your world as well.
Yeah, I think there is, and it's something that the chairman and the owners of this business have brought to the business, and something I've learned. So Hussein Rifai, the chairman, his model in buying companies, I think, is quite unique. So if we look at our last acquisition, our cuisine frozen meals business, it's a $30 million turnover business. It supplies New South Wales Health hospitals, frozen meals, and also the NDIS direct to home in an e-commerce platform. And that's really, so what we're first looking for is the channels that we work on. So we're already selling into those channels, especially New South Wales Health with our fruit cups. Most people would recognise our SPC Pro Vital brand if they're in hospital on their tray. So good synergy from that point of view in business. We could use our spread of our sales to build out their business further and more quickly. But we also were really wanted to make sure that the past owners were kept involved. So we buy a portion of the business, a majority stake up front. Both cash and shares in SPC. And that's important from the point of view that the owners get their liquidity they're looking for, but they're still involved in not only the business that they had for a period of time, but they're now involved in the SPC business. So we get that effect of them wanting to make sure in that transition that we're successful. So we don't lose the IP that they've got in their head. This was a family business that was started from scratch. Really important to keep those owners engaged for some time to go forward. Give them an opportunity to earn more because there's an earn out for them. If the business is successful, they earn more. And also that they're adding those synergies within the business of SPC because they're part owners of this business as well now. So I think it's a real clever way of keeping acquisitions engaged in the business, because that is a high risk stage of a business when you buy something that it gets lost within the bigger business.
You make a few really interesting points on that one, Rob. I'm interested to know how you maintain the sort of freedom and flexibility that those entrepreneurs want when they're moving into a larger business. And second to that, there's two questions in this one, double barrel. Do you provide some sort of support or coaching or mentorship within that larger business on how those businesses can expand their channels?
So the first part of that question, I think, keeping their entrepreneurial input alive is that we create a management board around their particular part of the business, because obviously it's got some very clear objectives. And I think that's how we make sure that we don't smother them with the SPC way straight away, and we keep their voice really strong through that board. And that particular board I chair, and we keep the owners, one of the owners a step back and the other one is still playing an active role, but even the founding owner who has stepped back, he comes in for those quarterly meetings. He's got his ownership in SPC, so he's still putting forward his ideas quite openly that we can consider. So I think that's how we make sure that entrepreneurial or that culture of the previous owners stays alive within the business and doesn't get suffocated. In terms of the mentorship, probably something we're still working on. I think these boards help provide that mentorship because it gives them a voice. But probably something that as we continue our resources will continue to grow.
Fantastic. Rob, you've been in the industry a while and you've come from a sales background as well. What sort of innovations have you seen that have evolved the industry in your time that you've been in it? If you can describe the sort of changes that has caused, and then moving forward, what you really see as the next step, what's happening next?
Yeah, I think if I keep closer to my space, I think one of the changes that's really affected the industry is, there's been a big consolidation, and there's a big consolidation in the marketplace as well as the manufacturers. The marketplace is still quite consolidated. I still see manufacturers starting to blow out again as new entrepreneurs, take up new space within the market. Yeah, I think the other move is to the big sort of move to fresh and better for you. So people are looking for product that, wellness is really important. They really want to know where the food came from, the properties of it, less sugar, less salt. And, hopefully, there's even a push towards the food miles that it's traveled. So I think, the education of consumers around food has really changed. The other big change that's definitely happened is the changing appetite of foods that people eat. So, from meat and 3 veg that I was growing up on, I think the stat recently, 1 in 5 people in Melbourne and Sydney were born in Asia. So we've got a very Asian influence, but also Australians are adventurous in lots of different cuisine types from around the world. So I think it's that experimentation or willingness to try different food types that has created opportunity, but has also sort of changed the industry.
And is that common with, trying other food types and exploring foods of different cultures? Is that common globally, or is that something that's just in the Australian market? I can imagine that with globalization over the last 20, 30 years, that's really changed a lot of things. But is that the case more globally?
Yeah, from my travels, I think it's globally people are trying more foods, but I think Australia would be leading the forefront. And I think we've always been a country of lots of different cultures, and we like to experience different cultures. And with new cultures comes new foods. And I think Australia, more so than maybe other countries, has always been willing to try, especially in the hospitality space, different food types.
How might that change with the move to local? A lot of people want things to be local and sustainable. Is that going to shift how people appreciate these meals, or do you think that this trend of really enjoying global foods is the way that it's going to be?
I think Australia being the type of country it is and the size and the different regions, there's no reason why we can't have the global cuisines but sourced from a local base. We've got great seafood, fresh produce, fruits. Our pomegranate business, which was, again, driven from our chairman's knowledge, he grew up in the Middle East. And so pomegranates was a really popular fruit in that particular region. And then we found out that we had 80,000 pomegranate trees grown just down the road from our factory in Shepparton. So when we're seeing the explosion of, the use of pomegranates in cooking, whether it's in salads or in marinades or the juices. So I think it's just a great example of something that was a global and a trend and even this one being an ingredient, is very localised to where we were in the Goulburn Valley.
From the sounds of things, we'll be using global techniques, but locally sourced or locally produced. That sounds like the future of that space. Thanks for sharing that with us, Rob. Getting into the latter end of the episode, just have a few more questions for you. I'd love to know if there's something that you're reading or absorbing. Is there a resource that you're looking to at the moment for the sort of learning that you're doing personally, professionally?
Probably most of my reading is use different social platforms. I'm listening to a few podcasts at the moment. I follow a lot of articles on LinkedIn. I think, the group and the following I've developed in LinkedIn seems to be generating a lot of content that keeps me interested.
What podcasts do you listen to, Rob?
So some of our industry ones, the food and drink, I've been listening over the Christmas to Mentor by Mark Burris is one, and obviously more recently with your conversation being introduced to your podcast as well.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that, Rob. I hope you keep listening. Who's been the most helpful or supportive along your journey? Have there been people that you've learned from along the way?
Yeah, they have. And I think I look at a long career at Simplot, the CEO there, Terry O'Brien, the unofficial mentor, showed a lot of faith in me over the time. I like the way he went around developing out Simplot. And when I joined Edgell Birdseye as it was back then, it was a $300 million business. And when I left, it was just under $2 billion turnover business. And him and I were there during that whole period. So I really look up to the way he led that business and assisted me in my career. And along the way, there was different, at Nestle or at Simplot, different sales directors or board members that really helped me, trusted me, and kept me focused on improving.
Is there anything you can pull out that you took away, some really important lessons from those people who taught you those things? Really 80-20 sort of stuff. They'll tell you something small and then you'll get a massive gain from that information. Was there anything that jumps out at you like that?
I think for me, it's the trust that people put in you. When you get aligned and they really place trust and empower you to make decisions, I think I took most out of that growth of Simplot. They grew very fast as a business. We had some really great customers. Simplot's business is founded on the McDonald's business, and managing the McDonald's account for French fries and hash browns was something that I learned a lot from their business, but also I think the support that the business gave me to being a private business to make the decisions within the framework is probably what I take out. So it's not a particular try this or do this. I think is when you can create that level of trust with your staff and you empower them accordingly.
Excellent. And it really does sound like you're applying that in the business that you're in now with the businesses that you acquire from the last questions that I've asked you, Rob. So thanks for providing that as well. Just the last couple of questions for you. I'd like to know what your biggest challenge is right now. What is it that you're really not necessarily struggling with, but what's a challenge that you're grappling?
Yeah, and I think I've touched on in as part of the conversation, but it is changing that culture around a business. We're struggling, didn't know if it was going to keep its doors open, and the culture that the people that work within that, to bring in on new leadership. We spent a lot of time bringing on a new leadership team across this business and creating that new culture of a private, fast-acting business to what it was before. I think whilst adding lots of new companies, like I said, 3 companies in the last 12 months we've acquired into this business, balancing that growth ambition and resetting the culture is probably our biggest focus at the moment.
Excellent. Rob, last question for you today. I'd like to know who you'd like to hear on the show.
Yeah, I'd like to hear from Terry O'Brien. I mentioned him before being a bit of an unofficial mentor, but he's built a big business with Simplot, but since leaving, he sits on lots of Australian food companies, so he's obviously still shares the passion of food businesses within Australia and on their boards. So getting his perspective would be really interesting to hear where he's at right now.
Excellent. I'd love to have a chat with Terry. Thank you very much. And Rob, I want to thank you again for being on the show, for providing some very insightful answers to the questions that I had for you. Good luck for the change that is occurring with SPC, the cultural shift in the business. And thank you for giving your time to sit down with me and record the episode today.
Thank you very much, James. It's been a pleasure.
This program is hosted by James Henderson, with technical production by Jake Olver. Voiceovers were by Angus Brennan and Shim Phelan. Thanks to our distribution team, and a special thanks to you for tuning in every week. This program was produced by H Media. We'll see you soon.